All right, welcome to this next panel at Sustainable Foods. We're going to be talking about alternative proteins. I think you can tell by the sounds outside my window that I am in busy Mumbai right now. We are currently still under semi-lockdown from the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think this is a particularly apt time to be having this conversation at the end of the year 2020, when we've seen what a global crisis looks like. We're going to be talking during this panel with some wonderful people about a trend or a class of technologies that show tremendous promise to address some of these major problems in the world: food security, climate change, public health crises, and animal welfare. And of course, our focus is going to be on sustainability during this discussion. I'm Varun Deshpande, Managing Director at the Good Food Institute, India. We're part of a global network of nonprofits focused on accelerating the alternative protein sector across business, science, and policy. And I'm delighted to welcome our panelists today, Joe Raven from the FAIR Initiative, Alison Greenhalgh-Ball, excuse me one second. Yeah. Sorry, I was getting a little background noise. Alison Greenhalgh-Ball from Kellogg, Corey Nobile from Impact Snacks, Lee Recht from LF Farms. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves for a couple of minutes. So I'll start with Lee. Lee, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Varun, and it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here at this panel. My name is Lee Recht. I'm head of sustainability at a company called LF Farms. It's an Israeli food company, and we are developing cultivated beef steaks. So basically what we're doing is we are not so much an alternative to the protein, because we are creating real steaks, but an alternative to the production of the meat. And we do that by mimicking the same the process that's occurring within the body of the cow, but we're doing that now outside of the cow, outside of the body of the cow, in a very, very controlled atmosphere. So that allows us to use no antibiotics, no harming or killing of the cow, and then of course also with minimum environmental impact.
Thank you, Lee. I'll go to Corey next. Corey from Impact Snacks. Would you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Absolutely. Thanks, Varun. Yeah, so glad to be here. My name is Corey Nobile. I've been founding companies with my co-founder since we were in 6th grade. Recently left college to go full-time and on making everyday snacking sustainable, which is our first commercialized approach at changing the way we look at single-use products by creating like a modular circular supply chain where you can basically plug any traditional product into. It'll spit out a lookalike version of that product that maintains the margin structure, but is actually carbon negative and legitimately carbon negative. So yeah, thanks, Varun.
Thank you, Corey. Alison, would you tell us a little bit about what you do at Kellogg, please?
Yes, and thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. So I'm Alison, and I work for Kellogg's. I'm the global lead for health and well-being, and I lead the kind of company strategy and implementation of thinking about well-being in a holistic way, putting people, planet, and food at the centre of everything we do. So really looking forward to our conversation today.
Pleasure to have you. And Joe, finally, could you tell us more about the wonderful FAIR Initiative?
Thanks, Varun. Hello, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. So thank you for the invitation. And my name is Joe Raven, and I work for an initiative called the FAIR Initiative, which is a collaborative investor network representing over 250 institutional investors with $25 trillion in combined assets. And our whole focus really is on raising awareness of the different ESG risks and opportunities across the full protein value chain, both animal and plant, and alternatives, including cell culture. So we help investors to identify and prioritize these factors through research that investors can then integrate into their own investment decision-making and active stewardship processes. But we also run a number of collaborative engagements with global food companies across a number of ESG topics. And one of those topics is protein diversification, and specifically how big food can use it to drive growth and mitigate ESG risks in their supply chains. So very much looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you all. Really wonderful work. And as you can tell, we have a wonderful mix of panelists across innovative startups, really large food companies, and then, of course, enablers in the ecosystem, all sort of working together to get us to a more sustainable food landscape. We're going to start at the beginning. We're going to talk about what's going on in alternative proteins generally, what the categories of foods that comprise alternative proteins are, and why they might be better for the environment and for a better, more sustainable world. So I'll start with you, Alison. Could you tell us a little bit about where are we in the global market on alternative proteins? What's going on in this space?
Yes, and how fascinating it's been to see the journey and witness the journey of the maturing of this category. And very much the way that we see it, or the way that I see it, is what we call trifurcation. So what do we mean by that? Well, we see three kind of merging categories here. We see traditional meat, and within that, obviously, we have various kind of components of the industry and choice there. We see meat analogues, so those that are trying to replicate meat from a taste and sensory and an occasion perspective. And then what we're seeing, I think really kind of rise like a phoenix actually, is those plant forward alternatives. So those that are not trying to replicate meat in a sensory or a mouthfeel or even a composition point of view, but those plant forward alternatives that can come in at any point of the day and offer protein through a diversity of plant-based ingredients that can often be quite different in its composition, quite offering different occasions and meeting different consumer needs. So I think we're seeing kind of three camps, if you like, and I'm sure that will continue to evolve, but currently I see it as trifurcation. And frankly, there's probably a role for all of them because they're meeting different needs throughout the world and different needs for consumers, even throughout the day. I think sometimes we like to put consumers into one of those camps, and the reality is that consumer needs and values and choices differ even throughout the day and even throughout the hour, actually, if you think of yourself in that situation. So that's where I see it, trifurcation.
Got it. And at the Good Food Institute, we definitely focus on the meat alternatives piece of this. But Corey, the work that you're doing is fascinating in the snack space, right? So we also see this across the broader food landscape, as well as Alison was saying, a lot of reformulation of existing categories or new innovation that takes plant proteins and puts them in really interesting newer products that meet consumers where they are. So could you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with Impact Snacks and why this fits in, or how this fits into the broader alternative protein landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. And similarly to kind of Alison, there's a little bit of a, we call it the trifecta that we think is driving a lot of this change. And but it's more coming from sort of the pressures that are forcing traditional businesses and traditional business practices and methods of consumption to change, and their regulatory, environmental, and consumer pressures, right? And so, on the environmental side, I mean, it's pretty obvious that we need to kind of rethink our food system. The food system is responsible for over a quarter of global emissions, and obviously these are just estimates, but I mean, it's a huge amount. And with that, I mean, you have things like beef, which take up over half of all agricultural land, but are responsible for less than 2% of global calories consumed. So there's this disproportionate negative impact caused by very specific types of food and very specific types of consumption. So our goal was to look at what are those points of consumption that create the largest amounts of negative impact, find the intersection between those and kind of frequency of consumption. And we landed on snacks, and snacks are seemingly innocent, but they create over 1 billion packaged snacks are eaten in the United States every single day. It's a huge number, and almost every single one of those results in the packaging ending up in a waterway or landfill. But with that, you also have animal byproducts in a large portion of them. So we thought that if we could make a product that matched price and quality with these traditional products, we could meet these consumer, environmental, and regulatory demands, and and never have to force compromise. So it's been a huge battle because when you're going to replace traditional product with something, obviously you have to, satisfy the consumer from a quality perspective. But if you're staying true to a mission, you need to look at, the level of impact that you're going to now create, the residual impact that it creates. An example is like the cost, the water cost to produce different types of protein. That was huge for us, right? So, I mean, on one hand, you have things like beef, which is, a large protein source that we're trying to kind of displace from our food system. And, to produce a pound of beef, I mean, it can be up to 90 gallons of water. Microalgae, the same, pound can be 1 pound of water. So, and if you look at it, on a per gram of protein basis, it's also pretty staggering. So for us, it was all about finding the right points of, intersection, points of consumption that were disproportionately negative or positive, and making products that do not force compromise.
And Corey, I have to ask you this. Is your packaging edible? Because I've seen videos of your packaging where it dissolves and it's edible. It's super cool.
Yeah. And thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. So because it was designed to look, feel, and function like traditional plastic, like our whole position is you can't tell consumers to stop using a product if you're not willing to give them a product that matches price and quality. I mean, there's a lot of people that'll make the conscious decision, but I mean, it's never going to get adopted at scale if it's not at that level, right? So we wanted to match the functionality of plastic, but have it be entirely both home and industrial compostable. And the best way to let the world know is to post ridiculous TikToks of the whole team eating them. So the whole founding team's eating our wrappers, and it looks pretty nuts. Even the inks are made out of vegetables, but yeah, we've had too much fun with it, but it's chewy.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of fun, and I want to zoom in on one of the insights that you provided there, right? So in order to help consumers make a switch, it has to feel like a simple switch and not a sacrifice. You have to be able to meet the consumer where they are and offer products that taste the same or better, cost the same or less, etc. I want to go to Joe now and talk about that second category that Alison mentioned, the meat alternatives space. Corey mentioned there's a huge disproportionate impact of animal agriculture on the environment. So we're seeing a lot of investment in the plant-based meat sphere. Could you tell us a little bit more about kind of what's happening in that ecosystem, how much investment has gone into that space, and why it's such an exciting area to look at?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the first thing is this need for dietary change has become even more important. I mean, given the impacts, especially of today's global pandemic, we've seen consumers worldwide, and I think from our own interest, particularly in China, given the impact of African swine fever on pork production, rethink how they eat and what they eat, given supply chain disruptions, and this increasing concern over the link between meat production and viral diseases. And I think Goldman Sachs actually recently said that coronavirus has made oil and livestock one of the most two precarious commodities for investors next year. But the flip side to that has been this surge in demand for plant-based products worldwide. I mean, at FAIR, we've been working with 25 leading retailers and brand manufacturers, and we found that all of them are investing in their own internal capacity and innovation to support the expansion of their plant-based portfolios. And this growth really is coming at this time of accelerated innovation in food technology. I mean, Corey's just given us an example of that, and obviously Lee as well here with Aleph Farms. And this accelerated innovation in technology, I mean, it's showing no signs of slowing down. And we've seen the first 9 months of 2020, for example, has seen $2.5 billion being invested in plant-based and cell culture technologies, which is over half of all-time investments in this space. So it's significant. And the US and Europe are the more mature markets, and even Australia as well, both from a consumer and an innovation perspective. But we've seen Asia, and in particular China this year, have been at the forefront of plant-based expansion. I mean, consumers in China are turning to plant-based alternatives as they are perceived there to be slightly safer, especially as a result of what's happening in the pork space. And the hike in price has also made plant-based pork options from domestic players the cheaper alternative. And all of this is not going unnoticed by big international brands. I mean, we've seen Starbucks, Beyond Meat, Cargill, KFC, Oatly, all enter the Chinese plant-based market this year. And even NH Foods, which is a leading meat processing company in Japan, has also launched a range of meat alternatives earlier this year. I mean, this is still a tiny part of the total protein market. It's about 1%. And we've modeled different possible growth scenarios. And in a low growth scenario, we still see this at, by 2050, seeing the alternative protein market representing about 16%. And in a high growth scenario, it could be as much as 62% of that market. So clearly, this is not a cyclical trend. It's here to stay.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Joe, I want to underline a couple of things that you said. I mean, it's all over the world. There's been a ton of investment in this space. And what's perhaps most encouraging is traditional, conventional meat producers have invested to a great degree. So we're seeing, let's say in the US, 9 out of the top 10 US meat producers have invested in or started their own line of plant-based meats as of the end of 2019. So we may see a lot more moving forward as well. And I really do want to stress as well that what these meat alternatives are showcasing is a model for a much less environment intensive approach to solving this problem, right? So if you look at, for example, the US on average eats 3 burgers a week, everyone in the US, which for all sorts of reasons is just crazy town. If you replace just one of those 3 burgers a week with a Beyond Burger made by Beyond Meat, it's the equivalent of taking 12.2 million cars off the road or powering 2.3 million additional homes. So that's where these meat alternatives are playing right now. But I do want to also go to Lee right now and ask her about the technologies that are coming on the horizon. Because sometimes when we talk about the kind of work that LF Farms is doing in cultivated meat, cell-based meat, it sounds like science fiction, but we're very close, aren't we?
Sure, yeah. So actually it does sound a little bit like science fiction, but the truth is cultivated meat, the concept of it is really to mirror a natural process that's occurring in the body. So, I mean, as animals, humans as well, we continuously reproduce our cells all the time. We're replacing our cells constantly, and that's the concept of cultivated meat. The idea is that we're mimicking the process of the tissue regeneration that's occurring in the body, but this time we're doing it outside of the body and in a controlled atmosphere. So basically, the concept is we take a cell sample from the cow or from any other animal that you want to cultivate. And we do this, and we created, in Aleph Farms, we have created the cell bank. And this is one of the main issues, one of our IPs is that we have the cell bank. And then we put these cells, instead of feeding the cows, we're feeding the cells directly. And we feed them, we put them in these bioreactors. It looks really, when you imagine a facility for cultivated meat, it really is very similar to a dairy facility, like yogurt, or even a beer facility. So these are like these very clean, automated bioreactors where we put in we call them a growth medium, but they're basically a soup of nutrients, of sugars, of amino acids, fatty acids, all the things that we would feed the cow. Now we're feeding directly into the cell. This is what allows us to be so efficient in our process. These cells multiply themselves. We call this proliferation, and we can actually let them create what we call a differentiation. So these cells with the right conditions, they can become muscle cell, which is the major cell that you want when you're eating meat, but we can also differentiate it to fat cells and blood cells and different fibers, and all of these cells together create that full steak. Because when you take a bite in meat, and that's really what we're trying to do in the end, what we're trying to do, exactly like Corey said, and also like Varun, like you said, is we really want to make sure that the consumer is comfortable and is satisfied. In the end, we know that food is an experience. It's an emotion. It's a culture. It's a history. It's a gathering of the family. So we really need to make sure that, beyond the fact that it needs to be sustainable for the environment and healthy for our bodies, but it really has to connect to what's in our plate and how we feel while we're eating it. Anyways, once we do that proliferation and we do the differentiation, we can then afterwards, we put the cells on a scaffold, which is basically a plant-based, and it mimics the matrix, the extracellular matrix that's in the body, and the cells adhere to it. And that's how we create this 3-dimension steak. And that's what, and basically what we're doing is really, I mean, it's very, there's a lot of technology. You have to really understand what's doing. There's really very wonderful researchers and people that are very much dedicated in the development of this product. But in the end, it really is taking a natural process and just putting it in outside of the body and having it in controlled conditions. What this allows us is also that we don't need any antibiotics, which is a major aspect in the animal industry. So it's also really a matter of also health issues. There's no really processed food here because we're really just working on mimicking that same process as well. So we're using natural foods. Personally, Aleph Farms is doing this all with non-GMO cells as well. That's something that we've put a really strong emphasis as well to. And also, of course, on antibiotics, and add to that also what it does on the reduction of the environmental impact, and of course, of animal welfare, but also the workers' welfare. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of like farming the cells directly instead of farming the animal and slaughtering it. And
we really, I'll just say, we really believe we're an extension to the agriculture, right? Because it's just like looking at hydroponics. It's another way of growing different kinds of plant crops. This is exactly how we look at cultivated meat. It's just a more efficient way of growing meat.
So 10, 15, 20 years down the line, you and I could go to our friendly neighborhood microbrewery and we could have a brewed craft beer and a brewed craft sausage right there on the premises.
Absolutely.
Or maybe we could do it in space too, Lee. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah, sure. So one of I'll tell about it. So one of the things that Aleph Farm is putting a very strong core is on our sustainability efforts. And part of our sustainability efforts is everything that has to do with food security and the fact that we can produce food in any place in the world at any time and to anyone and in a very short matter. And we wanted to kind of test that. And we did a collaboration with another company called 3D Bioprinting. And we cultivated the first beefsteak in the International Space Station last year in September 2019. Because we really, and it was, I mean, it was exciting because there's nothing like combining space into any kind of product. But also it was really to prove how we are capable of producing this food, our food in such limited, in areas worldwide that are limited in the resources that we have, or even have real scarcity in the conditions. Since then, we've actually really noticed, this was a kind of something that we did as a test study, but we actually, after that, we were approached pretty much by all the space agencies possible, because we understood that there was really a real interface with how producing food on Earth in a sustainable way is very much connected to how you can create food in space. So we launched about a few weeks ago, we launched our space program in Aleph Farms called Aleph Zero. And that's exactly what we're doing. So it's actually we're still very much focused on the market of Earth, but we're doing it because we understand that for us, space is like looking at a sustainability lab. It's whatever we can create there will impact the way we create our production line within the Earth in a more sustainable effort.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Lee. And I want to touch now on the topic of nutrition and access, because I think, of course, sustainability in food is a major question today. It's a major issue that the world is grappling with. Of course, that's why all of us, including you in the audience, are here today. I want to go to Alison and ask the question about things like the questions about nutrition and how alternative proteins are both enabling, but also are debated when it comes to the nutrition debate, whether we're creating foods that are able to essentially steward the next generation.
Yes, and goodness, how long have we got? Because this is a meaty topic, literally, and very complex. There's lots of misinformation out there about nutrition. And I try to explain, the fundamentals of what we need to think about are, we get kind of very kind of obsessive about, certain nutrients of concern, when really what we should be thinking about is nutrient density. So what does that food deliver in its entirety? And then we should be thinking about, no food has an impact negatively or positively if it's eaten once. So, what is in that food? What do you eat with that food? And what's the frequency of consumption? So how frequently do you have that in your diet? And how much of that do you have? And that's when you start to have an impact, kind of positively or negatively. And I'd like us to kind of always think about those three elements when we think about the roles of all three types, the trifurcation, all three types, what's in it, the nutrient density, how frequently do you have it, and what do you maybe consume with it? And then you'll start to have an impact on your health. And we know protein is in particular is so important for growth and development. But we also know with certain proteins, how they deliver other nutrients that your body so needs. Over 2 billion people around the world are currently, desperately in need of 1 or 2 nutrients. And we know that the devastating impact that we see both on malnutrition, but overconsumption with obesity. So, many people are not doing this right and not thinking about kind of the role that foods play in the diet and what's the combinations that we need to think about in order to achieve that optimum status. So, again, when we think about the trifurcation approach, the nutrition side of that is really fascinating to me. Do we think about how complete that protein is? Does it have all the amino acids that we potentially need? Or actually, when you think about those plant-forward alternatives, what, again, do they provide the complete protein? What's the quality of the protein? But what are the other elements positively that they might bring to the diet? And I'm thinking there about plant-based ingredients and the not only the diversity that brings and how positive that is to address the devastating loss of biodiversity in the world, but it can bring fiber, micronutrients that are so important for growth, development, and also your microbiome, and we know that that's so fundamental to all aspects of health. So I'll pause there because we could go in all sorts of directions, and I've just kind of given you a little bit of a teaser, but it's complex is what I'm trying to say. And often, I'd like us to have a holistic debate when we're thinking about nutrition, thinking about people, planet, but also all aspects of our society, from affordability, accessibility, and not just think of those expensive meat alternatives that are amazing and have a significant role to play, but let's have a holistic conversation here.
And I definitely want to return to the question of the cost basis, right? Because that's a very salient question. And I want to ask Joe a question about that in a minute, but I want to go to Corey here just for a second. Corey, could you tell us a little bit more about the segments that are driving consumption here? So for example, for Impact Snacks and for your peers across this new category or across this alternative protein category, could you tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing in terms of customer segments that's driving this? What are people asking for? What are they buying?
Yeah, for sure. Something that we're seeing is kind of, I know this is the alternative protein segment, but a move away from just looking at protein or kind of like muscles as a lot of, because, we're in the snack space, right? So just looking at like muscles and it's a very like traditional and kind of like bro way to kind of look at food. And that was kind of a big problem that we encountered early on, because a lot of our, potential competitors that was like their point of emphasis. And one thing that really changed the way I personally, as the founder of the company, which then spilled over to the, what we produce as a startup. But one thing that really changed the way I look at food was I was actually at a place called Bethel Farms when someone told me that if you actually, look at the body, over 60% of the total cells in your body aren't yours. Obviously, you have your microbiome. People understand this, but if you removed what is, quote, you, there would be this aura. And it's essentially like a universe within you. And that is what you're feeding, right? So I think there's this huge push for solutions that kind of aid both mind, body, and gut, and kind of leading with function, as it relates to the whole body holistic nutrition, which is a little bit of what kind of Allison touched on, is something that we're seeing a huge level of demand for. Specifically with alternative proteins, though, I think what's really awesome is people's willingness to explore, and we have a lot of internal data on this, but there's also kind of endless studies and research around this, but it's sort of like, you mentioned we ate the wrapper, right? That it's quote shocked the world, right? People saw that and they're like, what's going on? And people bought the bars just so they could eat the wrapper. There's people going out of their way to experiment with alternative proteins, and I think that's such a positive sign. And if you zoom out, 40 years ago, Americans, I think it was like 90 pounds of beef per person every year, and that number is now 60. Whereas if you look at chicken, which was about 40 pounds per person 40 years ago, now it's about 90. Right. So I think as a collective, people are making more conscious decisions, and the willingness to experiment, I think, is driving that, because while something might seem foreign, and while something might seem, I guess generally unfamiliar, we've noticed this huge point of realization, and it's kind of like if you have two products and price and quality is the same, or even if the price is a little bit higher, but one is sustainable or better for you and the other one's not, the choice is pretty easy. And the last thing I'll say is I think there's a lot of there's a lot of pushback from let's just call it big meat for right now. That's trying to say, oh yeah, but like all these different processed alternative meats are actually worse for you than meat, and it's like it's ridiculous. It's so they're saying it's unhealthy, but as opposed to what, right? If you look at our food system, I mean, it's completely broken. The number one goal never was early on to just design for health, right? We're just trying to design to get people to switch from what's clearly worse. And that's the first step, right? Eventually it's going to, it's going to be, get improved exponentially over time. You have really cool things like what Lee and her team are working on, where, I mean, you can even achieve like zero marginal cost of replication with synthetic biology, right? So in terms of like price parity, I mean, it will be achieved, and not only that, but it's going to be orders of magnitude less than traditional meat products. So I mean, there's all sorts of factors, right? But price, quality, willingness to explore, and an understanding that there's already been a massive shift in kind of the collective consciousness to continuously improve purchasing decisions and kind of uphold social contracts to kind of make sure their peers are doing the same. So, and we're seeing all of that. And interestingly enough, it's not just like, I'd like to say it's just a Gen Z thing, so I could talk really good about myself and my peers. No, there's conscious consumers in all different demographics, right? I think people just think it's young people because they're the ones that are most active on social media. So that's who you see babbling about it all day on their stories. But all sorts of different consumers, and yeah, the shift is really happening for many of those reasons. But if that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Actually, you did a great job of kind of talking about all of these forces pulling in different directions, right? So this is why we need to demystify some of this stuff, because we do have, more adoption than ever in history of a lot of these products. That's because the products are getting much, much better in terms of taste and price. But at the same time, if you look at any of the projections of meat consumption over the next decades, we're going to need to produce 50 to 70% more meat by 2050. To feed this growing population. And in fact, I'm from India. A significant portion of that increase in demand for things like poultry is going to come from places like India as incomes rise, because it's these foods, meat foods are prestige foods. They bring people together, they're aspirational. So I want to put a question to Joe. The companies that you work with, much like Allison's Kellogg's, are very large investors and very large big food companies. And the way that we get from where we are now to really wide proliferation of a lot of these products, whether they are snacks that are formulated with alternative proteins like what Corey is doing, or whether they are meat alternatives, it is to work with the companies that have mega distribution. Could you talk a little bit about how they're seeing this space, where they're investing, and what you think the future is? And crucially, I think how we get from where we are now to price parity.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, just for context, because I'm sure many of the audience are not so aware of it, but I mean, FAIR's been working for the last 4 years. We've been running a collaborative investor engagement with 25 leading retailers and brand manufacturers. And the whole focus of this is to really encourage big food really to adopt a protein diversification strategy. When I first started, and I remember the first conversations on this, speaking to some of these companies and, even talking and using the term protein was pretty unknown. They're like, we don't sell protein. Well, you do. You've got dairy, you've got butter, you've got milk, you use eggs in your products, etc. So we've been through a bit of an educational piece, both at the company level, but also with investors. And now, I mean, the last phase just came to an end, which was phase 4, and we're about to kick off phase 5 of this. I mean, phase 4 was supported by 88 investors representing over $13 trillion in combined assets, asking these 25 companies, to develop this strategy. And this is quite significant because it requires a rethink around business models, commercial strategies, and it requires significant investment in R&D, in marketing, in how you engage consumers, because it's more than just simply adding products on the shelves to increase product choice. It's around behavioral change, because ultimately, I think the fact that the climate mitigation potential is pretty clear. And I think for companies that sell meat, milk, and egg products, a diversified protein portfolio is one of the most efficient and profitable paths for addressing both the growing sustainability risks associated with it. Rapidly.
Uh-oh. So I wanted to first confirm that wasn't my internet in Mumbai, but it is Joe's internet in London.
Sorry, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good now. Go ahead.
I'm not sure how much you caught that, but I'm gonna actually try to just turn off my video shortly. So hopefully you can hear me at least.
Yes.
Companies that sell meat, milk, and egg products, a diversified protein portfolio is one of the most efficient and profitable paths for addressing the growing sustainability risks associated with intensive animal protein supply chains, but also to drive growth in a changing market. And it's also a key strategy for contributing to the SDGs. And I think with that in mind, what we're seeing now is companies actually dedicating human resources focused on plant-based product development. We've also seen brand manufacturers, for example, of the companies we've looked at, 10 of those were brand manufacturers, and 60% of those have now established venture or accelerator programs that have invested in or have a mandate to invest in that alternative proteins. And all of this is really helping to scale up and increase momentum around, and hopefully in the end address issues like nutrition and cost. I mean, happy to give some more insights. I mean, I'm not sure, Varun, if you want to go into the nutrition piece because that is one of the areas that investors are increasingly concerned about. I mean, as I said, we know the climate mitigation potential, but nutrition, especially for a lot of the popular plant-based meat alternatives that we've seen, have been questioned in the media quite a lot. And I mean, perhaps there's a slide that I wanted to share very briefly that touches on these main points, and I wonder if that can go up on the screen. So what I hope you can see is a little analysis that we did where we wanted to look at what is an average US burger and compare it to like leading plant-based burgers. And what you see is this comparison table. And what we found is that the beef burger is high in cholesterol, saturated fat, and it has more calories, for example. While plant-based burgers listed in this table, with the exception of what we call Nestle's Sweet Earth Sensational Burger, they all still have a slightly lower protein content, but they are better in terms of calories and cholesterol. But again, plant-based burgers do tend to have higher salt as well. So there's clearly, But again, these are still 1.1 or 1.2 or even 2.0 versions, and the potential to improve these is significant. And I think the last point I'd like to make around nutrition is that it's important to remember that these products that we're seeing in the market are still really fast food products. And I don't think in anyone's vocabulary, I mean, a sausage or a burger does not necessarily equate to a balanced, healthy diet in the long term.
Yeah, and these numbers, by the way, track with other kinds of comparisons that have been done. So an organization called Food Frontier, which is sort of our partner organization in Australia and New Zealand, they did a similar analysis and they found very similar results, which is plant-based products like burgers and sausages and mints were all matching the nutrition, lower cholesterol, lower saturated fat, slightly higher salt, etc. I think that's where we are right now. And it's, as Joe said, generation 1.1. I think to Corey's point from earlier as well, this is going to very rapidly evolve. Labels might get cleaner, costs might go down, etc. Alison, I think you had a contribution.
I have to come in. I have to come in, you know, to challenge actually that lens, because I only saw negatives there. And, you know, I'm a state registered dietitian. I've spent 3 decades in this space. And you have to look at a more holistic picture. You have to be looking at the quality of the protein. You have to be looking at broader nutrient density. Don't just cherry pick the negatives. They're important, but it's not the total picture. So I urge any kind of analysis in this space to be broader in order to give that kind of full picture and be truthful and transparent.
So I'd love to briefly address that, because I mean, if you do, you know, if you don't like isolate certain, you know, bodily functions, if you don't like isolate certain macro micronutrients, and you just look at longevity as a whole, which I think is pretty telling. That's what we're all trying to achieve for people and planet. It's pretty clear that plant-based alternatives in virtually every single scenario increase organic life expectancy and advanced longevity, where the consumption of meat and especially red meat does not. So when you have
that's
massive,
2 different issues though, isn't it? We're talking about nutrient content, and then you're talking about health outcomes. But I think let's just make sure we just disentangle those two. They're both, of course, they're codependent, but let's just make sure we've got clarity in the debate when we talk about those. Because there's all sorts of things. I agree with you, you know, meat consumption and red meat and processed meat has been cited to be kind of causative to certain conditions like cancer, etc. But so has, you know, not including enough kind of fruit and veg and legumes in your diet. So it's a very, very complex picture, but just let's make sure that if we're talking about nutrient density, let's talk about nutrient density. If we're talking about health outcomes, let's talk about health outcomes.
Right. Yeah, I just think, yeah.
Sorry, in the interest of time, I think we should draw a line under the nutrition debate, because I think that can go on for many hours.
Absolutely.
And Corey, your point is definitely taken. I mean, there are things that we should care about that relate to these ultimate outcomes, that relate to longevity, and they relate to, sorry for the motorbikes outside my window, but they relate to ultimately our healthy life expectancy, as opposed to just one decision or one-off. I totally agree with that. I want to talk a little bit more about the future of this space, the entire alternative protein category. And for that, I have to go to Lee first. I mean, Lee, you do a lot of work on sustainability within LF Farms. I'd love to know more about, you know, the kinds of projections that you're seeing for cultivated meat, what it might look like in terms of its life cycle, in terms of the sustainability involved, and then what the timeline looks like for coming to market and cost parity, etc.
Yeah, sure. So there were a couple of questions in one, but I'm happy to answer them all. As for the for go-to-market, currently today, cultivated meat is not in the market. It's actually not even approved regulatory in any region. However, there are frameworks almost in every region worldwide. The USDA and the FDA have a framework. European Novel Foods have a framework in Asia and Singapore, South America. So all of these areas, and we're actually in collaboration with all of these regulatory organizations and government units that are working on this. These are the way we see it. These are our partners. There's a very positive efforts to get this going, but we expect this to happen in the next 2 years, the regulatory areas, and that's where we also believe is when we're going to start seeing the go-to-market of cultivated meat. So specifically, Aleph Farms is now, as we speak, is creating. We're doing our first pilot. We're outside of a product, I guess. We're now creating our pilot within Israel, and we already established where we're going to have our commercial pilots that will come out together with the regulations by the end of 2022, the beginning of 2023. That's how we estimate it. Personally, we're coming out on a full commercialization level in 2025. As far as sustainability efforts, so when we look at all the alternative proteins, whether it's on plant-based or on the production line like cultivated meat, in the end, we're comparing ourselves to an industry, the conventional meat industry, which is clearly not sustainable. So that kind of positions all of these companies to being extremely sustainable just because we are that alternative. But Aleph Farms has decided, and we've put this in our core essence, is that we need to be, as an independent manufacturing food system, we need to make sure that we're accountable of how we are going to be producing food in the future. And that's why we've come out with a very strong sustainability strategy and efforts where we want to take it. And it's important for me to say, because a lot of times people look at sustainability and immediately think about environmental aspects, environment, planet, and that's crucial by all means, but it is only one of the main pillars that we look at when we're looking at sustainability. So for us, the way we looked at it, we're dividing sustainability into 4 major pillars. The first is environmental, of course. Very important that we're reducing to even neutralizing our environmental impact. We have declared that we're going to be carbon neutral by 2025. That's pretty much saying that as we come out commercially, we're going to be a carbon neutral manufacturer in our operations themselves, and throughout the full supply chain will be carbon neutral by 2030. But also we're looking at circularity and recyclability, water footprint, waste management, and so on. So it's a very holistic approach, but that is only under the environmental aspects. Our second pillar is, of course, the social aspects. So for us, it's really important. We're looking at the livestock farmers. We're not here to replace conventional meat. We're here to be part of a landscape of the whole meat industry. Just as, and the truth is, to be a resilient economy, we need that diversity, and we need to have different ways of producing our different foods, and have more diversity in the products that we have. And we believe that it's important that we are strengthening the livestock farmers, the communities, and making sure that there is not, making sure that we're not coming instead and replacing and causing some kind of resistance because we're coming out to the market. So we're really working on a social sustainability efforts of how we can work very strongly together with the farmers and the agriculture as well. The third pillar is health and nutrition. I'm not going to go into it as we did before, but for me, looking at sustainability and looking at long term, we have to take in consideration how we feed our body, and in a holistic approach. So that for me is under sustainability as well. We need to make sure that we are creating healthy, nutritious food that is part of a diverse diet. And last, of course, the last pillar is the economic aspects of sustainability, because this needs to be beyond the fact that we need to have a resilient supply chain and we need to be affordable. For us, pricing is a major issue. We don't want to be a premium price. It's true that right now, as we enter the market in 2023, 2025, we're still going to be a little higher than the conventional meat products, but that's going to change in the next decade. So our whole roadmap and our aiming is actually that we're affordable and we can be approached to the mass, and the market for us is for whoever is interested in meat. So looking at all of that, you have to have that really holistic approach. That's the way we kind of see it. And of course, sustainability in all elements have to be a driver for the growth of the company. This is not a nice to have thing anymore. I mean, this is not under, corporate responsibility of where we can, where we can support a community. This has to be something that brings in the growth of of the business, and that's how we actually maintain sustainability. So I hope I gave you that.
Thank you, Lee.
In a nutshell.
Alison, I'm going to blend a question that we've got from the audience with my next question to you. What's next for Kellogg as you explore this new landscape, as you really impose yourself on this new landscape, and how does alternative protein dovetail with that? Because Kellogg has a history of producing foods that are processed, let's say, right? And then there's all of this literature and all of this, let's say, these headlines about processed foods, especially in the alternative protein space, is what we were talking about. So how do you reconcile those two things, and what's the future of Kellogg in this space?
Yeah, sure. And I love Lee's description of sustainability, because that in many ways mirrors our approach. So we're thinking of well-being in three ways, really. I think you're calling it sustainability, we're calling it well-being. So the first one is societal well-being. So how do we make sure that we're nurturing our planet? We are thinking about the devastating loss of biodiversity and how we can address that, both individually as Kellogg's, but actually a call to action broader than that. How we think about livelihoods, how we think about serious issues that, like hidden hunger. We know that that's a real kind of issue that we all have responsibility to lean into, and we take that very, very seriously. Then we think about physical well-being. Probably you would describe that as nutrition. So how the role of our foods play in the diet, the role of nutrient density, the role of the microbiome, how you can meet the differing consumer needs throughout the kind of ages, and affordability too. And then emotional well-being. So what I would love us to always remember is that food is more than nutrients. Food is love, it's connection, it's sharing, it's occasions, it's celebrations, it's sensory, it's food experiences, and it can be a real joy. And so how do we make sure that we are thinking of all those three elements in everything that we do? And that's going to drive us forward. Our history started with plant-based alternatives. So we've literally, our legacy kind of comes from that spot, where we wanted to provide an alternative to meat at the breakfast table. And that's the origins of our company. And, we had we had meat analogues 100 years ago. And we know that we have, one of the biggest brands, Morningstar Farms in the US, that we see the diversification within that brand, and Incognito as well, where we have meat analogues and we have plant forwards, and we see the role for all of those in the diet, both in the US and broader to that. But we have to meet many, many consumer needs as we move forward, not just as Kellogg's, but as an industry. How do we recreate the sensory? How do we think about nutrition? How do we make sure it's affordable, accessible? How do we make sure that we're bringing joy to the table and that culinary aspect too? So hopefully that's answered your question, Baron, but I think we have an imperative to act here. We've all cited the devastating kind of situation that we find ourselves, exacerbated by COVID. We have to address food security. We have to address biodiversity. We have to feed the world in a nourishing way. And plant-based and meat analogues and meat alternatives have a significant role to play, but bringing joy to the table too.
Absolutely, Alison. And I would encourage everyone to actually read the fascinating history of Kellogg, because the story of the breakfast cereal is really wonderful. Corey, I wanna go to you now, just with a similar question about the future. What does the future hold for you personally, for Impact Snacks, of course, but also for the food landscape for this category? I mean, you've been inspired to enter this space because you said the food system is broken, right? Where do you see the food system going in the next 5-10 years?
Absolutely. And kind of just ways to sum up how I think the food system is broken. I mean, there's lots of health issues, but we can go into that debate another time. But I mean, just if you look at the 10 largest food companies in the world, if they were a nation combined, they would be the 25th largest polluter. So I mean, that's just another example about of how there's a lot of residual impact beyond just nutrition that really needs to be examined and kind of rebuilt. But where's the future going? I mean, right now we kind of are doing what we've been doing for hundreds of years, kind of the make, take, and discard model of creating pretty much anything. Waste is not treated as a resource, and there's this kind of pile up. And every time we kind of add to this pile up, whether it's plastic pollution, whether it's food waste, the problems compound over time. And the unfortunate thing is, we don't have a lot of time at the rate that we're going and on this current trajectory. So there's some serious shifts that we need to make. And I think it really starts with, and I think over the next 10 years, we'll see this starting with, again, repurposing waste, recycling value, and kind of making supply chains more circular. So, I mean, that said, I think in the world of food and beverage synthetic biology, I think it's fascinating. The idea that you can literally grow like software, I think can solve many of the world's problems where kind of food insecurity is concerned. I mean, also if you just think about like vertical farming or algae production, I mean, you have abundant amounts of protein without the acreage, and that's value, right? So when you're talking about increasing the demand for beef increasing, 50, 60%, well, what's that going to correlate to in terms of required land? I mean, at a certain point, there's a very finite amount of land. The tree can only grow so high. Abundant protein without the acreage equals value is a huge concept that I think is only going to, grow, and price parity will not just be achieved with alternatives. It's going to put traditional agriculture, specifically meat, out of business. And I truly believe that. So Lee, while I really, really agree with the approach to work with farmers right now, especially sustenance farmers, to figure out how our supply chain can be rethought, maybe even make it a bit more humane. Ultimately, even if we're not going to be as a collective displacing animals from supply chains out of the goodness of our hearts, it's going to be the financially responsible thing to do, because at a certain point, synthetic biology, I mean, there's no competition as opposed to traditional methods of producing meats. So and what we're trying to do is we're trying to be a big part of that shift. I mean, it's such a colossal problem that we're all trying to tackle. Any of the several problems that we're all collectively addressing. But I mean, our goal is to, again, we productize a circular supply chain, and we're trying to build it to a point where you can literally insert any traditional company or product, and it will literally recreate that and make it actually not just far more sustainable, but actually more efficient to produce, which is, the world is ran by financial incentives. And I think the leading sustainability initiatives will understand that and not just rely on people's ability to choose good, which is happening again. But, you have the consumer side, you have the business side, and businesses, financial incentives need to be there. And for consumers, I mean, that obviously results in, the price they see when they go to the grocery store and they look at a product. So, I'm in the Boston area. I have a lot of friends on the West Coast. And I hear a lot of them always talking about, oh, why don't people just do this? Or why don't people do that? And it's, there's just a huge disconnect. There's so many parts of the world where sustainability cannot be a purchase driver, because the cost is it's a huge barrier to entry. So,
I'm gonna have to stop you, Corey, because we have a hard stop. I want to thank everyone for your time. Thank you so much, Alison, Corey, and Lee. Joe, are you still with us, Joe?
I'm still here. I'm going to try the video.
Literally 30 seconds. What does the future hold?
Well, I think from the investor perspective, I mean, investors now want to see companies clearly demonstrate that they have clear strategies for how their product portfolios are going to need to change to become more climate aligned. And we're already starting to see the first time-bound commitments to support the flurry of R&D and product development from big food coming. I mean, you've seen Tesco come out with someone, Unilever as well. But I think the one thing I wanted to touch on is that there needs to be, and there will be, I think, a greater emphasis on nutrition, particularly when it comes to emerging markets where the needs are completely different. And current market strategies for plant-based products in the West are focused on meat alternatives, but in places like sub-Saharan Africa, for example, the focus needs to be on meeting nutritional requirements rather than encouraging consumers to buy meat alternatives that may not always fit the bill. So I think there's significant opportunity there to help those markets bypass the need for the industrialization of animal agriculture by diversifying both the production and consumption of protein to ensure that these nutritional and sustainability challenges are addressed. So I'll stop there as we're now out of time.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you so much, everyone, for your time and for joining us at the Sustainable Foods Conference. Take care, everyone.
Bye, guys.